Hey everybody, welcome to For Food's Sake, the podcast bringing you down-to-earth dialogues about the food on your plate and its many impacts on people and the planet. My name is Matteo De Vos, and without further ado, let's talk about food. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the For Food's Sake podcast. Today we talk to Natalie Pukasemvarangkoon. Natalie is the founder of the Paleo Collective. And Natalie's actually a childhood friend of mine. We go way back. We actually grew up in Thailand together. It's been really nice over the last year getting back in touch with Natalie, and very refreshing actually to realize that we're both really enthusiastic and passionate about a lot of similar food-related issues. Now, Natalie's someone that's experimented with pretty much every diet in the book over the last decade or so. And what's worked best for her so far from a health perspective and what she's ultimately stuck with is the paleo diet. So after graduating from UCLA in the States, Natalie, very much in response to her own health struggles, started the Paleo Collective. Now, the Paleo Collective is an umbrella for the paleo lifestyle. They provide paleo-friendly caterings, they provide personal chef services, they host pop-up dinners. They also do corporate talks and host demos to educate people on the diet and on the paleo lifestyle. And they also have this really great blog where they share paleo recipes and health-related tips that relate to the paleo diet. And they also share that, Natalie shares that on a bi-weekly basis, usually every Sunday and Wednesday on Instagram, these paleo recipes. And so in a nutshell, the Paleo Collective is really a platform that helps people take charge of their own health and really serves as a catalyst to help people make the lifestyle changes that they want. So in this episode, we're going to be discussing obviously what the paleo diet is, how it differs from different diets, such as the vegetarian diet or the vegan diet, but also how it's surprisingly got a lot in common with those diets. We'll also be discussing the gut microbiome, which is this vast, fascinating ecosystem of organisms in your body, in your gut, that consists of bacteria, of yeasts, of fungi, of viruses, and how they all live together and how they together form this fascinating nervous system that we're only really just discovering, and how that nervous system is actually really sensitive and reactive to the food that we eat. And so here, of course, because we're talking about the paleo diet, we'll talk specifically about how gluten and other grains, which are considered a sin, a total no-go in the paleo diet, how those grains can cause inflammation and digestion issues in the gut. And so how the paleo diet is one response to that. All right, okay, let's get straight to it. Here is Natalie from the Paleo Collective. Today, we're going to be talking about the paleo diet with Natalie, my friend Natalie, who's on the line with me now. Hi, Natalie.
Hi, Matteo. Sorry, he's only laughing because I'm being inappropriate via video.
Yep, we're lucky enough to have a good connection, so we both have our video on for now. We'll see how that goes. Yeah, Natalie, you and I go way, way, way back. We grew up together in Thailand.
Back in the days when we were innocent and did not care at all about the environment or what we ate, those days.
Those days are over. We can never go back. We're, ignorance is bliss,
Once you go clean, you can't go back.
Yeah, that's definitely true. But you've decided to go for a paleo diet, which is something that I think most people don't even know how to pronounce. And it's a diet that I don't think a lot of people know exactly what it is either. I mean, vegetarianism is pretty self-explanatory. So is veganism. Not so much in France, but generally it is. But when it comes to paleo, I don't think a lot of people know exactly what it is. So could you maybe tell us a little bit about what the paleo diet is?
Yes. So a lot of people pronounce it paleo. I have no idea why. It's a European thing. Anybody European I meet says paleo. Paleo essentially is it's a diet, and I hate using that word diet again, and I'm going to throw that cliche. It's a lifestyle, not a diet. But it really is a way of living where you're focused on a very nutrient-dense food diet. So it essentially eliminates any foods that is at odds with your health. So we're not trying to just eat food that is okay for you or not harmful. We're trying to really optimize our ability to function on a day-to-day basis. So, we focus a lot on vegetables, organic vegetables, lean protein. And, this is an important thing when you're eating protein, unlike, vegetarian and veganism. We're focusing on high quality proteins such as wild-caught fishes, grass-fed red meat. If you're going to have chicken or turkey, it should be organic poultry with no hormones. And then the other food groups that we focus on include nuts and seeds. We don't do dairy. It's a bit of a gray zone. Some people will do raw grass-fed dairy if they can tolerate it. But generally speaking, dairy is a food group that we eliminate with the exception of pasture-raised eggs. So again, the focus is on high quality foods. We avoid gluten, grains, beans, and legumes. No soy, and anything processed really. So without overthinking it, if you think about a day where you just want to be a little mindful about being healthy because you're about to go out, whatever the reason is, people typically are having a salad with chicken breasts. Without even knowing it, right there, your dinner is paleo without needing to label it. So I don't want to, people to get so overly intimidated by the label because it's actually a way of eating that comes quite naturally to you.
Right. And so paleo, that's paleoific, right? So it's a diet that's it's like an ancestral diet. Can you explain a little bit where the diet comes from?
Yes. So it was originally founded by a doctor called Loren Cordain. And he wrote a phenomenal book, if you guys want to read more about it, called The Paleo Diet. But the whole basis is it's called the Paleolithic diet because it stems from the Paleolithic era, where it's pretty much like caveman style, how your ancestors ate. Now, the minute you say this, people are like, oh, well, your ancestors didn't have coffee. They didn't have supplements. It's called the modern caveman diet for a reason. Mm-hmm. It means you're taking the best out of how your ancestors ate before agriculture, before industrialization, before all these mechanisms that allowed food to be so highly available and fast to make. So we're taking the best of that world and incorporating with things that we know in modern day that is good for us and combining the two basically.
Okay. And I think a lot of people can agree at least. I mean, I'm speaking here as a vegetarian and having just kind of recently finished my 30-day vegan challenge.
How dare you?
We could talk about that too, about the whole the beef, forgive my pun, the beef between vegans and paleo diet people. I still don't know what to call them. I'm going to call them paleos. Even if it's not a thing for this episode, I'll call them paleos. But no, I think a lot of vegans can agree, cutting out dairy and cutting out all these processed foods. But I think where a lot of people kind of, where their jaw drops when it comes to the paleo diet is the no grains, the no legumes. I mean, what's the the scientific basis here? Why cut out everything from the agricultural revolution?
Let me tell you that. Excuse me. So, grains, beans, and legumes, first of all, let's start off with something that is a little less scientific. So a lot of people, there's that saying beans make you fart. And people joke around about it, but that's your body telling you that I can't digest this thing, and once it gets to a point where it's quite severe, it's no longer funny where you're just going, I'm just farting. You're getting intestinal cramps, which is what I get when I eat beans, legumes, and grains that are hard to digest. People say quinoa is a superfood and it's amazing for you. I eat quinoa and I look like I'm 6 months pregnant. I get so bloated. And trust me, I am all for you being intuitive in terms of being in tune with your body and knowing what works for you. Right. So if you can really digest quinoa and you feel great, go for it. Right. Like I said, I encourage using the paleo guidelines as a blueprint and making educated decisions and choices as to what works for your body. So the more scientific part in terms of grains, beans, and legumes is that They contain these anti-nutrients called phytates, which, if you're not familiar with, what phytates does is it binds with the good minerals and vitamins in your body during digestion, and it stops your body from fully absorbing it. So let's say you're eating rice, a grain, with Brussels sprouts, which is known to be high in iron. The anti-nutrient phytates during digestion is from the rice will bind with the iron from the Brussels sprouts you're eating. So you think you're eating all these nutrients, but your body isn't actually fully absorbing all that iron, and that can lead to like iron deficiency. And I think that that's something I sometimes encourage vegans to be mindful of.
Mm-hmm.
I love actually when people are like, look, I'm vegan, whatever, because I think they're a step ahead of the rest of the world trying to take care of their health and, doing something about it. So I'm like, here, I'm just giving you the information and you decide. So be mindful of getting enough vitamins and nutrients and not eating a lot of the other ingredients that might bind with that and stop you from fully absorbing it. So that's why we, kind of avoid those food groups. But having said that, I will have white rice maybe twice a month.
Right.
And that's my quote unquote, like, cheat meal, if you want to call it, which I don't do the whole like, oh, Sundays are my cheat meal, whatever. I try not to think that way. I have white rice twice a month because, I love Thai food.
Right.
That's, where we grew up and that's nostalgic for me. And people might be thinking like, wait, brown rice is healthier. I can't digest that, whole hull that comes with brown rice. So even when you hear like the bulletproof diet, which is, going viral around the world right now, they are very close to the paleo family and they kind of allow white rice, but not brown rice. So yeah, I can digest white rice, but that's basically the reason why we stay away from those food groups.
Okay. But so you think it could be something that's, personal, that depends from person to person almost, or at least certain people will be able to digest, whole grains better? Because, I mean, the issue I have, and this is the reason why often in my podcast I stay away from the whole nutrition debate when it comes, whether it's veganism or the paleo diet or anything else, is that I have read or I have heard people cite studies from across the scientific board claiming that every diet, from just a moderate, a diet of moderation, just a normal standard diet that includes everything, to completely, raw vegan diet, to 100% paleo diet, I've seen, arguments for every single one. And so I have this tendency, and I think this is maybe what puts a lot of people off when they hear these nutritional arguments. You can hear everything. You can Google what you want to hear, basically. And I think that's where at least nutrition as a science is quite, from my experience, quite unique in that you can really find scientific backing of almost any argument. I mean, do you think there's some credence there?
You definitely, but this doesn't even just apply to nutrition. Let's just life, period.
Right.
You will justify anything you want to justify if you want to, right? Whether it's a bad habit, the way you operate, a personality trait, a reason for eating a certain way, you will do whatever it is to justify that if you believe in it. And I believe the same about nutrition, and people do that. And so that's why, like I said, even whatever it is I'm saying right now, take it with a grain of salt.
Right.
The best thing you can do.
Not literally, right? For paleos, no salt there?
No. Wait, no, we do salt. We just do pink Himalayan salt. Okay. So we do like high quality salts, no table salt. But is to really be in tune with your body, to listen to it. And, as extreme as it may sound, if you're dealing with a lot of health issues, you need to start doing food journaling and identifying the culprit and realize that how you feel right now is not how you should feel on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's what the paleo community focuses on, is wanting you to really thrive. Now, having said that, I've done like every diet you can imagine since high school. In high school, I was known as a diet queen. I think somebody actually wrote that in my graduation book. I have done the like vegetarian, pescatarian, veganism, 80-10-10, raw till 4, Jenny Craig, whatever it is you want to call it. And I'm at a point where I realize paleo really works for me. But like I said, blueprint, right? Just use it as a blueprint. And don't get too stressed out or frustrated with all these, articles and blogs and books that you can read. At the end of the day, you know your body best.
Right. Okay. And just one more. I don't want to quite, even though I'm usually reluctant not to talk about the nutrition bit. I know a lot of people are curious when it comes to the paleo diet. Also, when it comes to meat, right? The like you said in the beginning, meat is definitely a part of the diet. It doesn't have to always be the dominant part of the diet, but you also mentioned it should be, grass-fed game. So talk a little bit about the quality of meat and why that matters and how the paleo diet looks at meat.
Totally. So I just said totally. Sounds so American. So with protein, you want to focus on getting a lot of good, high-quality fats as well, right? So from things like avocado and almonds and whatnot. But the basis of the pyramid that I go off of should always be leafy greens and vegetables. And I think that's important, helping you digest protein and red meat. Now, when you're eating protein, and I think this is a misconception with the paleo diet, people think that it's this protein heavy diet where you're just eating like bacon, just because meat is allowed. But the quality of it makes all that much of a difference. And so when you're eating, say, like red meat, and by the way, I have this article on our website, paleocollective.com, that goes over 5 reasons why you should be eating grass-fed meat versus grain-fed meat. And it's a super easy read. Okay. So when people talk about getting their omega-3 from eating red meat, that is true, but only if you're eating grass-fed. Because when you're eating grain-fed, the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 is completely thrown off. And just a little, basic good fatty review, you want omega-3 and omega-6 in your body. They're both important in terms of metabolizing different things in your body. However, too much, the ratio you want more omega-3 than omega-6. Right. Too much of omega-6 and it causes a lot of inflammation. And omega-3s are great in reducing inflammation. So a lot of people with inflammatory diseases, autoimmune diseases like arthritis will take omega-3 supplements, right? So when you're eating grain-fed meat, that ratio is completely thrown off. It's a lot higher in omega-6 and the omega-3 content is virtually non-existent. So you want to be eating grass-fed. And on top of that, just, what comes with being grass-fed and organic is there's a standard for, the hormones and the chemicals that you're allowed to use. You want to avoid, there's a lot of mold in cattle food. That's the other thing you want to eliminate. Whatever the animal eats, you eat essentially. So I pay a lot for my meat, but that's because that's what I want to invest in. And we get our meat from, this farm in Australia as one of the vendors. You can also get it from your local butcher, but we focus on like pasture raised, grass finish. Sorry. And that extra dollar you're paying or pound or wherever it is you're living in is absolutely worth it on your health anyway, and saving the long-term bill of medical expenses. So yeah, but if you do want to go over, more of the scientific details, I don't want to bore you guys on the podcast. Just go on my website and there's a very easy read there. Okay.
Yeah, I think I can, as someone, I came to vegetarianism and veganism very much from an environmental perspective. And at least from that perspective, I think initially I had a lot of issue with the idea of a paleo diet because of the focus on meat, of course, and meat generally having a much higher environmental impact. Having said that, as far as I understand it, the paleo diet is much more in support of the kind of local farmer, the small scale, grass-fed, non-industrial meat that isn't necessarily correlated with the environmental problems that we see today. Is that a fair assumption to make, or?
Absolutely. And the thing is, and that's why I definitely, so people always ask, like, how do you know what are the best places to get your produce or meat or whatever, right? Like farmers market are such a great place to start. And I think the best way to do that is get to know the farmers, get to know your vendors. They're there on, your Sunday farmers market. Not all of them are certified organic because smaller farms can't afford that.
Right.
So you talk to them, you build a relationship, and there's nothing more comforting than knowing who's growing, your produce, how they do it, and knowing that you're supporting a small farm that is unable to afford the certified organic label, but you purchasing that, I just think that's really the best way to go about it. I sometimes will get it from a local butcher, but I also sometimes, like I said, I get it overseas from Australia. And yes, that is not local, but I'm also I spent months getting to know them and their practice and the quality of their meat and doing all these tastings. And I don't care that it's in Australia, because if I'm ordering on a large scale for catering for my clients, I want to be like, look, this is a great company that can become so big and start taking all the shortcuts like all the big companies. Instead, I want to support that their practice is, ethical. And I just think you just ask yourself, people's intentions, what are your intentions? And if they align, support that. It's that easy.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, for people that have been, my friends around me in Paris, they very much know that, I went vegetarian for a number of reasons, but the main one was strictly environmental. And when they kind of pushed me on it and asked me if I could ever, eat meat again, I'm someone that from an ethical perspective, fundamentally, I don't have an issue with eating meat, right? When it comes down to it, I see a world in which I see scenarios in which, and it's happened over the period of the 2 years that I've been vegetarian, very seldomly, that I've eaten meat from a source and from a system that I agree with from an ethical, environmental standpoint. It's very rare at the moment, and that's very much why by default I've become a vegetarian / increasingly vegan, because I don't agree with the meat that I'm finding around me in Paris, and I know that if I'm eating meat at a random restaurant that it's not going to be sourced from something I can agree with. But in principle, the idea of eating meat doesn't put me off. And I can very much respect vegans and vegetarians that will not from the ethical perspective. And that's something that I struggle with as well, the philosophical debate behind.
I used to be vegan. Trust me. I used to be vegan for 3 years. And then I had to transition to paleo. And, I definitely at the beginning had a hard time, adjusting psychologically. Right. And it's why I don't, I'm very much like you in that I don't want to focus too much on this versus this diet. And creating that separation. I just don't want to put all that, as LA as it sounds, bad vibes. People are doing their best with what they know. Yeah. And I think if you are an extremist, and you want to make sure everything you're doing is not just healthy, but ethical, good for the environment, then you're gonna have to also take on the financial burden of making that happen, and paying more for those things. You can't win it all while also being I'm going to be cheap about my groceries, right. And I think that's the battle. People want it all, but they're not willing to pay for it. And they're not willing to grow their own stuff. They're not willing to put the effort. I mean, we have 2 hydroponics tower on our patio where we grow a lot of our leafy greens and herbs and things like that. And people well, wasn't that expensive? And I'm yes, that was expensive, but I also haven't bought a purse in 3 years. Right. So, you sacrifice.
You pick your battles. No, that's definitely true. And I completely agree with your point on not trying to, vilify one diet or trying to pick sides or trying to pit it as vegans versus, paleos, as I'll say now. Yes. Especially because, when you're comparing a standard Western diet compared to a paleo diet or a whole foods vegan diet, you're really comparing apples and oranges. It's not at all the same. One's very much, focused on processed foods and relying on sugars and refined sugars. And the other two are very much focused on kind of more locally sourced, natural products that are better for your health. And this is something that I find really interesting as well about paleo. Is that I think for a lot of people that are not comfortable with the idea of giving up meat completely, paleo is a very, okay, maybe not a comfortable transition because you do have the fact of cutting out grains, which I think could be complicated for people, but at least it offers a kind of different pathway towards eating more healthily and eating more responsibly. And I think it also has there's a different level of respect for the animals and for the farmers that you're sourcing from. And I know a lot of vegans will cry foul that I'm talking about respect for animals when you're killing them.
I know. We're going to get so much hate from this.
Oh, sure, yeah. But at the same time, it's worlds apart from the industrial animal husbandry system.
Worlds apart. I mean, I know I sound very extreme when I say this, but fortunately in LA, I do know a lot of people who, have moved away from city life, West Hollywood, and they live in Malibu or more remote areas where they're able to have a little farm and have their own chickens, eat their own eggs. And I think that's quite extreme, but it's like I said, if you want to be that extreme, that's a choice you make. Mm. It's also funny because we were we didn't want this podcast to be so much about vegan versus paleo, but it sort of has become.
It happens. But just quickly on this point before I forget. So you mentioned, and I agree to an extent at least, that you have to put more money, not necessarily more money, but definitely more effort into your diet if you want it to be consistent with the values that you hold, whether those are environmental or ethical. But do you think for your average individual, or for your individual that isn't fortunate enough to live in the places that we live in or lead the lives that we lead, do you think a paleo diet is feasible? Do you think there's room for people to still eat close to what is a paleo diet on a budget?
You can get produce. And like I said, if you're not going to go 100% organic, then educate yourself about what the way things grow and what is safer to eat organic and what is safer to eat non-organic. Like the way onions grow, 99% of them, even the non-organic ones, have virtually no traces of pesticides. So picking your battle, right? And realizing anything you eat the skin of, you're going to go organic. But I think the excuse of being look, I'm on a budget, or I live in an environment where I can't do this, I can't do that. There's always a way to figure it out. It's the same analogies with people who want to lose weight, right? People make excuses that they can't lose weight because they can't join some fancy gym and they can't hire a personal trainer. Go running. The streets are for free, it's that same kind of analogy. And I think you might not be able to go so far extreme and be I'm going to have grass-fed filet mignon every night. No, get a cheaper cut, just get boneless, legless, lamb stew cuts. Mm. And that's a lot cheaper. I mean, right now at the grocery store, you're looking at 30 American dollars per pound for a rack of grass-fed lamb. And it's only $9 per pound for boneless, legless lamb shoulder or lamb leg, and I'm still getting grass-fed protein from that source. So it's all about what you want to learn, what you want to research, and how you want to make the adjustments. And I think if it's important enough for you, you'll figure out a way to do it. Now, I understand not every city have things like snacks easily as available. So you make your own snacks. You also don't want to pay $9 or $10 for a little truffle bar. Make it yourself. You're going to learn to cook, and you're going to do most of the cooking because you have full control over your ingredients. Mm.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Should we talk a little bit about, we said we'd talk about this, I don't know much about this, but about the gut microbiome. And how kind of it's a new, obviously not a new approach, but it seems to be a new field that's getting a lot of attention currently. And I often see a lot of the articles linked to paleo. So maybe, I don't know, explain a little bit what the gut microbiome is and how it relates to paleo and how it relates to diets in general, maybe. Because I think that's definitely something that's interesting.
Yes, and it's also very important. I could talk about gut health forever, so I'm going to try to like keep it short. Your gut, like your gut health is, I mean, it's becoming this topic where I get requested quite often when it comes to corporate talks that they want me to focus on that. And that's because logically, majority of your health stems from your gut health. If you think about it, you're eating multiple times a day, 3 to 5, 6 times a day, right? And so how your digestive system is, how your gut health is, affects everything from your skin to your immunity. And when you're eating foods that causes either a bacteria imbalance. So you have good and bad bacteria in your gut, right? And you want to encourage that healthy balance.
You have
When you're
trillions of them, right? I mean, sorry.
yes, like so many. And when you're eating things like refined sugars, which isn't allowed on the paleo diet, we opt for more like raw organic honey, or like natural sugars. But when you're eating refined sugars, you're feeding the bad bacteria in your gut. As a result, this gut is like, sorry, not your gut. The bad bacteria is multiplying and growing, and the next thing you know is there's a yeast infection, or you have a bacteria overgrowth, and it leads to a whole host of problems. And that's just like one of the many things that could happen when you don't eat well. The other thing also is when you eat foods like gluten, which is like the biggest no-no in, the paleo community. It essentially causes the cells in the lining of your wall to die prematurely. And what happens is when, the strength of the lining of the wall isn't as strong, bacteria can go in and out between your gut to your bloodstream a lot easier. So you can only imagine the list of problems that comes with that. You have toxins entering your bloodstream a lot easier. Your immunity sucks. You're going to get sick a lot more often. You have skin issues like eczema, psoriasis. And that's because you need to focus again on getting your gut health back to normal.
Is this like leaky gut syndrome or something? Is that
yes,
one of the, right?
Leaky gut is, and that exactly is what leaky gut is, what I just explained. Because people are like, is there like literally a hole? And I'm like, no, it's just your gut is leaky. Things are passing in and out very easily. So the paleo diet, with it focusing on supplements like bone broth, you're filling your gut with things like collagen and glutathione to essentially seal off your gut so that you create the strong barrier. And I think that is such a common topic that the paleo community talks about because they understand the importance of it. And I don't hear that so much amongst, other diets. Or I think it's something that regardless of whatever diet you're on, it's something you should definitely pay attention to. So often when people have a leaky gut issue, which leads to things like irritable bowel syndrome, like IBS, Crohn's, colitis. So a lot of my private clients have one of the three. It's a very common disease, especially in America, because we're like the land of processed foods. So right now, IBS, I think affects over like 3 million people in America. And people are now learning to take synthetic pills with each bite and each meal that they eat in order to be able to digest all those horrible ingredients. And that's, part of what happened with me too, is that I was told by doctors like, all right, you can still eat dairy and gluten and all this processed foods. You just need to take these pills to help digest it and alleviate some of the pains. And I was like, this makes no sense.
Right.
Like, I'm not going to adjust my food at all. And I just kind of took matters at hand, and I'm very stubborn about taking any, synthetic pills. To get me to take an Advil is like World War III in my house. So I am very conscious about eating any foods that irritates your gut and causes inflammation. So I definitely, and there's a lot of side symptoms like fatigue, depression. Those are things that you want to be mindful of and ask yourself how strong your gut health is. And, the best way to start adding good supplements for gut health include things like probiotics. Right. Everyone's hearing about probiotics, but again, you want to research what is going to get delivered to your gut without dying along the way. And it's paying for better probiotics. And you can even get that through eating fermented foods like sauerkraut.
Yeah,
and I think,
fermented foods. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's in this kind of category. That's where people bend a little bit with dairy. Like if you can tolerate and you don't have a lactose problem, people will eat like fermented yogurt, and that kind of stuff. But I can't do, lactose. So even with things like butter, I'll do clarified butter, which is called ghee. And it's basically where the casein and the lactose has been removed. So I use that a lot for cooking, and it's like good in, good quality fats. But yeah, you want to, and also, like I said, bone broth, collagen, glutathione, those things will really help your gut health. And I think that was my biggest transition. Not to, again, sorry, bring it back to when I was vegan, but I had a lot of gut issues. And while I ate a lot of greens and vegetables on the vegan diet, that helped alleviate some of the stuff. I think what really changed me was incorporating bone broth into my diet.
Okay, but do you think so? I mean, the paleo diet here focuses a lot on, grains being part of the problem that damages your gut. But do you think, would it be fair to say, because a lot of people I think will cry foul over this, that if you're comparing ancient heritage grains to the refined grains, the processed grains that we have today, they're uncomparable, right? If you're looking at kind of truly, the
completely
right, and so is there room there, or
you can't really? I mean, there's always room. People encourage like sprouting things, right? Even like nuts. People like nuts are hard to digest. I make my own almond milk, and I will soak my nuts for 8 hours. And I feel like it's okay for me to say soak my nuts because I'm a female. But
I was trying to hold back.
But I'll soak my almonds, and there's little things you can do to help improve like digestion. But in terms of like gluten being, my number one enemy for causing inflammation in the body, and it's why like it's a big no-no for people who are also like celiac, or who have Crohn's or colitis. There's not much in other diets that says you can't have gluten, and I feel like in the paleo diet, we strictly say no gluten, no refined sugars at all, so sugars has nothing to do with even like ethics. And it's simply to do with just pure health.
Right.
So I often ask, if people ask me, what is the first thing they, should cut out? I usually say refined sugars or gluten, and then work your way from there. But I'm more like all or nothing. You're either I go paleo or I'm not. I can't do the like slowly one thing at a time, but everyone's different.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one thing for me, especially when it comes to just bringing it back to the gut, that I find so fascinating is that, from what I understand, I'm actually reading a book right now called Gut, I think. It's a good book. I'd recommend it. But one of the things that I find so fascinating is how personal it is, right? And how almost every meal can kind of adjust, or at least over time, adjust your microbiome, adjust the kind of composition of your own gut. It can affect your mood swings. It even has its own nervous system, the gut. Like it really is kind of a second brain almost.
It absolutely is. I mean, that controls a lot of stuff. And I mean, what is it that you said just now that really, I was going to say, it's not something that especially with gluten, is something that you can cheat on. I don't recommend gluten being one of those things where you're like, I'm going to go gluten-free except for Sundays. Just because when I first started being paleo, I still wasn't aware of all the substitutions that I could do to like kind of satisfy that craving, or pasta or whatever, So like every now and then, like once a month, I would maybe have a bite of bread or something like that. And I thought, I was like, still, I'm more healthier than 99% of the world. I'm majority of the time paleo. That little like cheat day created inflammation in my gut. And over the long term, the effects just got worse and worse and worse. And it's funny because in the kind of paleo and bulletproof community, they literally equate gluten to heroin. They say you can't, like heroin, you can't be like, oh yeah, I sometimes, shoot heroin, sometimes I don't. You're either a heroin addict or you're not. And
I'm
they
a bread
equate
addict.
that.
I'm a bread addict. I
Yes.
gotta
And they
gotta say it.
equate that not to like, and I know there's been a lot of articles recently, especially saying like, oh, all these, people comparing gluten to heroin is so extreme, but it's because it's really addictive. When you think, and it's the same with sugar, there's a reason why there's really insane sugar detox programs, because these foods are very addictive and they contain a lot of the same like opioid contents that are found in opium. And the more of it you have, the more you crave. And it's why people who are cutting out these things sometimes get headaches. It's a serious thing.
But I see the same. I've seen the same argument used against, by in the vegan community, against cheese, against meat, that it's just an addiction, that it's an addiction we have to get over. So for me, I can't help but see some of these things skeptically, just because everything seems to be an addiction. And then at the end of the day, it kind of is, because it's food. So I guess it's normal that we're addicted. I mean, I get where you're coming from, and I wouldn't be advocating people to be eating, Wonder Bread, terrible, processed bread. But at the same time, I guess I'm more of a moderate in these things, in that I see, and I very much respect that it differs from person to person. But a good sourdough bread, I can't imagine that every once in a while can be compared to heroin. Do you know what I mean?
Right. And that's completely a fair argument. I think when it comes to, deciding what is addictive psychologically versus physically, you just got to look at the science of what each ingredient contains and what internal brain stimulators that they might activate that causes that addiction. And like you said, everybody is different. But also, a lot of addiction in terms of food is your association to it. Food is such a nostalgic thing, right? Like I said, I love Thai food because it reminds me of home. And but so a lot of it is psychological as well. I'm not saying it's all psychological, but I definitely think one of the best things you can do is changing your relationship to food, which it's taken me over 4 years to view food so differently than the way I used to view it. And I think this is especially for a lot of women as well, who view any type of food as enemies. Good fats is the same as bad fats. Right. And I almost never feel guilty about any food I eat, because I've taken the time to figure out the right substitutions so I don't feel guilty. I make my own ice cream. I know that my chocolate ice cream is made from raw cacao powder, and I'm getting the antioxidants from that cacao. I know that if I want to make something cheesy, it is cashew based with grass-fed ghee. So all these little shortcuts I make, I haven't deprived myself of anything. I'm definitely not a chicken breast, sweet potato, and broccoli kind of person.
Right.
Like on the weekends, I indulge. I make cupcakes. I make cookies, whatever it is. And so it's changing that relationship and realizing that when I look at food and whatever meal I'm eating, I also view it as a whole list of ingredients of what's going to nurture my body and what's going to be good for me. And that I don't have to calorie count or overthink about portions. People often ask like, how many calories is in this and that? I'm like, I have no idea. And that is not how I want to live my life, so overly calculated. When you're eating wholesome foods, you don't need to worry about that stuff. You're going to get full off of good foods, and you're not, and my friend made fun of me the other day. He was like, of course you're going to say calories don't matter. But I think, it's not because I'm genetically blessed, because I'm not. Because I'm Asian, I think people assume that. But I do think be mindful of what you're putting into your body, but don't stress about it, because that stress of calorie counting is only going to mean you're going to feel guilty later. Yeah. And that guilt is just going to make you want to binge.
Yeah. No, I really respect that. I think that's so important. When you said as well that you've been on this journey for over 4 years, kind of discovering what works best for you. And that's kind of a personal journey that I'm on too. It's kind of trying these different diets and trying to see what works best for me, ethically, environmentally, from a health perspective. And you, like we've said, throughout this episode, I think you start to realize that a lot of these diets are, in one way or another, closer to another than they are apart, and kind of going for the same goal of cutting out definitely processed foods, and then kind of seeing what works for you, and
yes,
and keep doing the research, and keep questioning your assumptions, like I will, with the vegan diet that I tried, and like I do with the vegetarian diet that I'm on. Nothing's set in stone. Like, I'm not, I'd never say I'm a vegetarian or vegan for life. I'm willing to let the evidence and the way my body reacts, convince me otherwise.
Yes. And I think, as much as I know we've like said the word vegan way too many times in this episode, as much as we've talked about some of the differences, like I said, whenever, even in the paleo community, whenever we're talking about competitors, business wise, from one chef to another, from one product to another, I think sometimes people lose sight that we're all essentially one movement, whether you call it vegan, whether you call it paleo, whether you call it bulletproof, whatever, ketogenic, whatever it is, we're still one big movement against, the majority of the world that is selling all the processed foods. That's our real enemy. None of these diets are condoning processed unhealthy foods. And so I do think that if you have a platform and you're listening to this where you have the ability to encourage people to purchase things or to use a certain service, like, realize your competitors aren't really your competitors in the community. Like, you guys should support each other. And I don't have that scarcity mentality. And so I think I encourage everybody to help each other. And yeah.
I love it. I couldn't agree more. So there you have it, guys, an introduction to the paleo diet, or should I say the paleo lifestyle. If you want to learn more, of course, you can head to the Paleo Collective website. You can follow them on Instagram to get their bi-weekly recipes. I've provided all that information in the show notes below. Oh, and also, before I forget, if you're interested in learning more about the gut, that gut book I quickly referenced to in the podcast is called Gut, the Inside Story of Our Body's Most Underrated Organ. It's a book by Julia Enders. She manages to cover the topic with a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of humor, and if you're interested in the gut, I highly recommend you check that out as well. All right, guys, that is it for this time. Thanks for tuning in. As always, if you want to support the podcast, you know how. On iTunes, you can rate, review, and subscribe. You can also let friends and family know about the podcast and recommend any of the episodes. You can stream all of the episodes from the website directly. That's at forfoodsake.me. And you can follow what we're up to on all of these social media platforms. That's Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. The social media handles for all of those platforms are For Food's Sake Me. Thanks again. I'll see you next time.